Mr. Keller, would you like to make any opening statement?
Just briefly, Your Honor. So back on May 2nd of 2022, this court had ordered the defendant be placed on pretrial supervision. The court ordered that she's not to have any contact directly or indirectly with any of the alleged victims across the multiple cases we currently have filed. The state has a couple witnesses from DCFS that the state plans on calling today, as well as Mr. Johan Appel, one of the alleged victims in one of the cases, to show that Ms. Appel violated this no contact order with her pretrial release conditions actually here in the courthouse several weeks ago.
Very well. Opening statement, Mr. Richards.
Yes, Your Honor. There is only one no contact order that we are aware of, and that is the contact order with Mr. Appel. And it's our position that on the date in question and the time in question, she did not violate that. Who inserted it himself into a conversation and invaded the space where she was at was in fact Mr. Appel. And he was the one, by his actions, that created perhaps a technical violation as perceived by the state.
Very well. Your first witness, Mr. Keller.
Johan Appel.
All right, Mr. Appel, let's have you come forward. I'll have you placed under oath. So just stand up right here and raise your right hand. Listen carefully to the oath.
You do solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give in the case now before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
All right, come forward. You're now under oath. Have a seat there, and just encourage you to speak loudly into that microphone so that the attorneys and the parties and the court can hear your testimony. Go ahead, Mr. Keller.
Thank you, Your Honor. If you could just state your name, spell your name for the record.
My full name is Lars Johan Appel.
And can you spell your last name?
Appel.
And how are you familiar with Ms. Channae Appel?
My current wife.
And do you recall what you did back on June 30th of this year?
Yeah, it was during a juvenile court hearing. I think we met to discuss attorneys, and everybody separated. And we were out in the hall, and Miss Appel is on the other side of the courtroom, and I'm on the very far, would it be left, courtroom 4.
And so let me just clarify a couple things here.
Yeah.
So you said this is courtroom 4?
I think it's the Galloway, whatever Galloway is.
Judge Galloway's courtroom.
I think that's courtroom 4.
And so were you inside the courtroom at this point or outside of the courtroom?
Outside in the hall, and it was me and Mr. Staggie sitting on our end, and she was on the other end. And she walked over to complain to Mr. Staggie about co-parenting and that he needs to answer his phone and not avoid her calls. And then she said something about co-parenting, and she walked over towards where we were. And that's when she said something about co-parenting, and that's when I scoffed and went. And I was looking at my phone, had my head down, and then that's when she became agitated.
And so you say she became agitated. Can you just expound on that more? What exactly did she do directly
She's
you?
just yelling at me, saying a bunch of stuff. I don't remember what the specifics were, but basically one of the things I remember was you violated a court order or something like that, and you violated the what's it called now? What is it called? I can't remember what it's called. It's basically a no contact order or something, but that got rid of.
So you mentioned that you were there, Ms. Appel was there, you were seated next to Mr. Staggie.
Yeah.
Who else was in the hallway in that vicinity that you can recall?
There was a couple of DCFS caseworkers. I think it was Rita and Desiree were sitting on the seat more to my right.
And how did you feel in that moment as Ms. Appel was confronting you?
I just felt kind of threatened a little bit. That she was just agitated, and she was just going off on me. And I told her to leave me alone and go sit over there.
So how did that all come to an end?
Basically, my attorney showed up, and she was still yelling at me, and pretty much kind of got my attorney kind of just ushered me into the courtroom.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Mr. Richards.
So I'm trying to figure out the timeline, Mr. Appel. Are you saying that you were sitting on a bench outside the courtroom with Mr. Staggie?
Yeah, Mr. Staggie, yeah.
And then Ms. Appel then came up to you?
She came up to, right next to me and right next to Mr. Staggie.
So it's not true that she was already standing and talking with Mr. Staggie, and then you came down to them to talk to them, and then you asked her about the ankle monitor on her foot and asked her what that is?
No, that was way later, after she's already been yelling for like 5 minutes when we were walking towards the courtroom. And she actually walked all the way down because I've been trying to not be around her as much as possible.
So she wasn't alone talking to Mr. Staggie before you came down?
No, I was talking to Mr. Staggie for a while, waiting for her attorney, and then she walked up yelling at Mr. Staggie about not returning her calls.
All right. Now, she was speaking actually to Mr. Staggie at that time, right?
Yes.
And wasn't actually directly talking to you?
No, not at that time.
Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect.
So just to clarify, when exactly did Ms. Appel direct her conversation or comments towards you specifically?
It's when I scoffed. Is when she talked about Mr. Staggie needs to co-parent better. I went like that when I was looking at my phone, and then that's when she instigated. Oh, you think that's funny? And then she came up to me. But it was between me and Staggie. It was the outside bench. It's only 5 feet apart from me and Channae and Mr. Staggie.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Right, any recross?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Appel. You're welcome to go take your seat. Next witness, Mr. Keller.
That would be Rita Caines.
All right, ma'am, let's have you come forward and be placed under oath. You just stand right there and face Angie here. She'll place you under oath.
You do solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give in the case now before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes.
Come on up here. Let's have you take your seat. Mr. Keller will start asking you some questions. Just remind you to speak up into that microphone so that we can all hear you.
Could you state your full name and spell your last name?
Rita Caines, Caines.
And how are you employed?
I work with the Division of Child and Family Services as a Child Protective Services caseworker.
And are you familiar with the Appels?
Yes.
What was your involvement in a juvenile hearing that, just generally, that was held on June 30th of this year?
I was required to be there because we filed a petition against the family.
Do you recall some events that occurred in the hallway prior to that hearing?
Yes.
Who do you recall being present in the hallway?
When I got off the elevator, I saw Mr. Staggie and Miss Barber, who was also employed with me.
And from that point, when you got off the elevator, could you just describe to the court what happened?
Me and Miss Barber were talking to Mr. Staggie about his daughter, Kira. And then Miss Appel came into the hallway, and she went up to Mr. Staggie and asked him if he blocked her number on his phone. He said that he did because he believed that Miss Appel was harassing him. Miss Appel seemed to get upset and started to say that she thinks that they should all act like adults and that they should co-parent better. I then believe Mr. Appel, I don't know if he got off the elevator or if he was already down the hallway, but he walked down towards us and he went and sat over by Mr. Staggie. Miss Appel asked why the fathers were smiling. Mr. Appel motioned towards Miss Appel's ankle monitor, asked what was on her leg. She said, "You know, what is on my leg?" That is when Miss Aubrey Thomas, Mr. Appel's lawyer, came into the hallway, asked why they were talking, and then Miss Barber tried to find a private room for everybody to separate.
How would you describe kind of the feel or the environment as that interaction was happening between Miss Appel and Mr. Appel?
There was a lot of tension.
And did you make any kind of report based on those things that you saw happen that day?
Report?
Mm-hmm. Did you memorialize what you witnessed that day?
Yes, I was taking notes during the incident, and then I did upload it into a document into our system afterwards.
And leave to approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
Now, and it's been marked as State's Proposed Exhibit Number 1. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
This is the document that I took notes on at court and then I uploaded after court.
And as you stated, were all these things jotted down by you when everything was still fresh in your mind?
Yes.
And, Your Honor, this time the State would move to introduce State's Proposed Exhibit 1.
No objections, Your Honor.
States 1 is received.
Thank you, Your Honor. And no further questions for this witness.
All right, let me take a look at States 1 if you don't mind. You have that back. Go ahead with your cross-examination.
So this report then was basically generated contemporaneously. I mean, you're typing things as you're seeing things happen. Is that right?
Writing them down, yes.
Okay. And so your testimony is that Ms. Appel and Sheldon or Mr. Staggie were alone talking at a place in the hall outside of the courtroom.
Yes.
And Mr. Appel was not anywhere near them at that particular moment or in time when you first saw them. Is that true?
Not when they started talking, no.
That's not true, or he was not there?
He was not there, sorry.
Okay. And about how long were they talking before Mr. Appel then came down and started to get himself into the conversation?
Probably only about 2 minutes.
All right. And then you saw Mr. Appel then ask Channae what was on her ankle. Is that correct?
After she asked the fathers why they were smiling.
Okay. So you described that there was tension. Did you hear anything inappropriate, per se, as far as conversations or any threats being made or anything like that?
I only heard Shani's grandmother ask her to calm down because she was pacing back and forth.
Excuse me? The caseworker asked her?
Shani's grandmother.
Oh, just to stop pacing so much?
She asked her to calm down.
Okay. But other than
that is why.
Okay, but other than that, were you able to hear then the conversation between Ms. Appel and Mr. Staggie?
Sorry, what?
Were you able to hear
Yes.
what Ms. Appel and Johan or Mr. Staggie were saying?
Yes.
Did you hear anything that was inappropriate or threatening in that conversation?
At the end of the conversation, she did say that she was planning on getting the protective order addressed.
Okay.
Besides that, no.
But there was a protective order existing at that particular time, right?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Oh, excuse me.
And that protective order was in her favor against Mr. Appel, was it not?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And did you notice whether her conversation was primarily directed at Mr. Staggie or Mr. Appel?
It was directed at Mr. Staggie at first.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any redirect?
Just that last question. So at first it was directed toward Mr. Staggie.
Yes.
Who was it then directed towards afterwards?
It was directed towards both fathers.
And you said that you didn't hear anything threatening, but and I may have asked this already, but what was the tone of voice that you heard Ms. Appel using?
Her voice was more raised than it normally is.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Caines. You can go ahead and take your seat. Any other witnesses?
No further witnesses, Your Honor.
All right, the state rests, it sounds like. Mr. Richards, any witnesses you'd like to call?
No, Your Honor.
Let's have a closing argument. We'll start first with Mr. Keller. Make your argument and then also address if the court were to find that she had violated a condition of the pretrial release, go ahead and address what your recommendations would be to the court.
Yes, Your Honor. So as portrayed by the witnesses the state presented today, there was contact made by the defendant to the alleged victim in this case, which is directly in opposition to what this court had ordered back in May as a pretrial release condition. Ultimately, we have 4 pending cases against the defendant, each of those involving stalking to one degree or another. The state had a lot of concern just from the outset of this case as far as the defendant's ability to be given bail in these matters. I know after some debate and argument, eventually the defendant was granted bail. However, it was with this very strict, very stringent no contact in place with the alleged victims in the cases. Now, as was stated, the defendant confronted one of the alleged victims. She did so in a threatening manner. It was a raised voice. It caused some fright upon the alleged victim in this case. So ultimately, the state would argue that it has shown a violation of the pretrial release conditions. The state's recommendation would be to revoke bail. As at the outset of these cases, that was the argument the state had, with having a lot of concern just over the amount of victims, alleged victims that we have who had to deal with the actions of the defendant, and now showing, especially in this case, it's a felony stalking violation that includes domestic violence. For the safety of the alleged victim in this case, and for the safety of the public at large, where the defendant can't obey the pretrial release conditions that this court imposes, the state would argue and request that this court revoke bail.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. Mr. Richards.
Well, Your Honor, I think it's very telling when you have Mr. Appel comes in and says that he was sitting next to Mr. Staggie, and then Channae comes up to them and talks to him, and yet you have the state's witness who comes in, the caseworker, and says that didn't happen at all. Not at all. In fact, she was talking to Mr. Staggie. There is no contact. There is not a no contact order between her and him. And then Mr. Appel comes and inserts himself into the conversation. He invades the space where she was at, putting her then in what the state is now arguing is a violation of the protective order. And Your Honor, I just don't think that kind of action and those that Mr. Appel has done should warrant a violation of her pretrial release and the conditions of her release. I mean, what is she supposed to do? She's in a hall. I understand she maybe shouldn't have applied anyway. When she goes and she says, "What are you smiling at?" But Mr. Appel knew exactly what he was doing, Your Honor. He was egging this on and asking them, "Well, what's that on your ankle?" He knows dang well what is on her ankle. And there shouldn't have been that conversation. But to sit here and say that it was threatening, even the caseworker said, "I didn't hear any threatening language or anything of that nature during any of this." And so it's our position, Your Honor, is that this order to show cause should be dismissed. There is no violation. You don't get to then say, "I've got this order, but I'm going to go and put myself over there where the person is so that I can violate that person."